I don't like celebrating funerals of people who are younger than I am, most especially when that person who is younger than I am was a good friend of mine. Vinny and I became very good friends through the San Silverio Society. When they came to us a couple of years ago, he, as the vice president of San Silverio, was one of the people that was instrumental in finding a new home for San Silverio when Our Lady of Pity was not only closed but razed to the ground, and they needed to find a new home. Somebody among the group suggested, well, let's try St. Anne's. A few of the members were parishioners here. And I remember Vinny and Doriana and Neil Calisi coming to see me and asking if we would give a home to San Silverio here. And I said yes at the time, just figuring it was just, a mass or two here or there that they'd have to do. And I said, oh, no big deal. Little did I know how much it was going to change me, that I was going to be absorbed into the San Silverio Society, ultimately becoming now the chaplain of San Silverio Society, and I think practically an honorary Ponzese. And the relationship between San Silverio Society and St. Anne's has grown stronger, and the generosity of San Silverio to St. Anne's here, the work that was done in our hall, for example, and the resurgence of life of an old Italian parish where our Italian heritage and identity has been little by little changing over time because of different influx of people, and we didn't have as many Italian immigrants as we had before. So it brought back to us a reminder of what St. Anne's had many years ago with so many of the Italian celebrations and things. And Vinny was a very big part of that. And I got to know him well, but most especially when he first found himself diagnosed with cancer. And of course, we're all familiar with death. We know that death happens in the world. All of us eventually do have to die. When somebody is in their 90s or near 100 years old and they die, well, there's a tear in our eyes. We know we're going to miss them, but we deal with it pretty well. And we say, I know we're only here for time. He or she lived a good life, and it's time to go home to the Lord. But when somebody dies the day after his 54th birthday, and that's hardly the passing of years, with so much left that he could accomplish, I know we could ask ourselves, why does this have to happen? And maybe we're even tempted to turn to God and say, Lord, why did you let this happen? A good young man like Vinny, who was doing so much, why did you take him? And it's a common question that I know a lot of people would ask. However, I've always felt the minute we ask that question, we've lost, because we will never get an answer that will satisfy us asking that. Because first of all, we never get that answer that says this is the reason why this happened. And we also will be forever frustrated, and maybe we'll have a target for our anger. God could have stopped this and didn't, so therefore we're angry at him. And we can have a target for our anger, but what it doesn't give us is any healing. It doesn't help us understand and move on. We, in our finite wisdom, believe that God should stop all the evil in the world, that when somebody is sick, he should always heal him. When somebody does something wrong, he should always right their wrong. That's the way we think God should save us. But God has a very different way of working. And we might be tempted to say, God, where were you with Vinny all throughout his illness? And the answer would be right there with him every step of the way. God had a far better way of saving all of us, and especially Vinny. Rather than keeping the evil away from us, he helps us go through it. Remember, first of all, we have to remember God is all goodness, all beauty, all wisdom, all essence, all truth, all perfection. It is impossible for God to do evil. God cannot possibly deliberately harm someone. It's impossible for God to neglect us. It's impossible for God to ignore us. God is perfection, and he cared about Vinny as if he were the only person he had ever created. But we think, as I mentioned previously, that God should stop the evil in the world, but he had a different way to do it. Where does evil come from? It doesn't come from God. The devil is the source of evil. He is the source of it all, and his war against God. And Adam and Eve succumbed to him and allowed him to tempt them to turn away from God. And by following him, they brought evil into the world. And all the things that we have, all the evils, all the things we suffer are not God's fault. It's the devil's fault. And he deliberately continues to bring them into the world, not because he cares about us at all. We mean nothing to Satan. But because he knows it hurts God to see one of God's children fall away from him. And he knows the pain that it shows God. He brings pain and evil into our lives, hoping we will blame God for it. Blame God for the evil that he causes. And when he does that, we give the devil, when he does that, and we follow him, well, then we've just given the devil his victory. So anytime I hear somebody say, why did God allow this to happen? I say, do you realize you just gave Satan his victory? You just did everything he wants you to do. He brings the evil into our lives, hoping we'll blame God for it, get angry at him, and step away from him. And this way the devil can just reel us in very easily. And for some people, it's so simple. They stub their toe and they're angry at God. And he says, boy, that was such an easy battle. But when we take the evil and instead of getting angry at God, turn to God and say, Lord, this is where I need you to help me, then we find the presence of God. And that's when the suffering can be tremendously healing. It brings us closer to the Lord. And Vinny did that. I remember the first time I sat down with him and he told me about his cancer, and he was scared. And certainly, anybody would be. But at the same time, he realized it woke him up to his need for God all the more. I mean, he never stopped believing in the Lord, but he said to me, I have to get back on track. I need to follow Christ better than I'm doing before. And I heard his confession, and he said, from now on, I want to be faithful. And he did. He joined our Christ Life program here and became a wonderful member of it, and it changed his life in many ways. And many of our Christ Life team members who loved Vinny very much are here today with him as well. And through it all, I saw a different person in him. You could see how the faith was coming alive in him. And his final battle, when the cancer came back with its aggressiveness, he turned to the Lord nevertheless for further strength. And through it all, he knew the Lord was there with him every step of the way. And what he did, whether he realized it or not, was took the devil's tool and his weapon and worked it against him. Instead of allowing the devil to turn him against God, he took that evil, the cancer that the devil brought into his life, and said, Lord, help me to let this bring me closer to you. And indeed, he knew the Lord was there with him in the trenches each and every moment of the day. The Lord has come to take away our pain and suffering, not by eliminating it, but by helping us defeat it. By going down into the dirt and the muck and the mire with us and taking on our whole human condition and knowing that even if we have to suffer, he will be there. As we heard in that beautiful first reading from the book of the prophet Isaiah, when you go through the fire, I will be there with you. I will be there to guide you and strengthen you every step of the way. And the Lord was there to help Vinny carry his cross, and he carried it valiantly. Even though it was painful at times, he never once turned against God and said, why are you doing this to me? But he said instead, Lord, help me. And in that, Vinny found his salvation. I had the privilege just a couple of days before he passed away. I visited him and anointed him, gave him the anointing of the sick, the apostolic blessing, all of the graces that we had to offer him. And he wasn't in pain. He said he was just very weak, but I could see there was a tremendous peace about him. He had accepted that he had run the race well. He had followed Christ, and he knew the Lord was there. And I think he knew he had won the victory. And in doing that, that's how he completely defeated Satan. Notice what happened. Satan brought evil into Vinny's life, hoping Vinny would turn against God and he could reel him in. But instead, he took all of that suffering and the evil that the devil brought, and it only brought him closer to the Lord. He defeated the devil with his own weapon, by turning the evil into his means of salvation. That's what Jesus did when he died on the cross. Took what was the worst thing imaginable and turned it into our salvation. And isn't the devil frustrated by that? I did all this to try to get him to curse God, and instead not only did it make him pull away from God, but it actually even threw him further into his embrace. If you could imagine the devil taking a gun, trying to shoot at him, and the bullet stops in midair, turns around and comes back and hits the devil and destroys him, that's exactly what Vinny did. Vinny fought the fight. He kept the faith, and now he has won the prize. And I'm sure he is with the Lord in his kingdom today. He struggled, but he struggled valiantly. And he's a lesson for all of us, how to take the evil things that happen and the pains and the sufferings in our lives and not to curse God, not to get angry, but to turn to him and say, Lord, help me to use this to grow closer to you, to bring me further into your loving embrace. And whatever it is that we suffer in our lives, at all different times, we come up with so many different things. that happen in our lives, whether it's physical pains and sufferings of illnesses, or people betraying us, or people being angry to us, falsely accusing us, lack of money, if we have financial problems, lack of popularity, all the different things that make us suffer so much. If we turn to God and say, Lord, help me through this, to let it bring me closer to you, and see that you are present with me each and every step of the way, we will have learned the lesson that Vinny taught all of us in his magnificent and valiant battle. He battled the devil, the demon of cancer, and even though it took his life, it could not take his soul. When he died, the Lord received his soul into his kingdom, the place that he inherited the day of his baptism. Vinny was promised eternal life with the Lord in his kingdom when his life on this earth was over. And now he has entered into that glory. And we pray that if there's any sins left unsaid, or anything that was left unsaid or undone by Vinny, the offering of our own prayers and the greatest thing we ever do for a loved one, offering the holy sacrifice of the Mass, will be applied to him and free him from all of his any pain of sin that he had committed, and now brings him into the glory of God's kingdom. And once there, I'm sure when Vinny saw one glimpse of heaven, he was, to use a colloquial expression, blown away by it. I'm sure he said, wow, they said heaven was beautiful, but I never imagined it was anything like this. And even that is not the end of the story, even as his soul is at peace with God now. Notice when somebody passes away, we do not just discard their body. We don't just throw it away, but we treat it with reverence. We've already blessed his body. In a little while, we will incense it to show that it is holy. And when our Mass is concluded, we will bring him to the cemetery and bury him with great dignity and respect, because we know this is not the last time we will see him. On the last day, when Jesus returns in glory, Vinny will rise from the dead. His body and soul will be reunited, and we'll see him exactly as we knew him before he died, only with no more cancer, no more of the weaknesses of this life, no more of the sorrows and the sufferings, no more of the conflicts and the tragedies and the tensions that cause us so much pain and so much grief in this life. On that day, there will be only health, only strength, only contentment, only satisfaction, only perfection, only peace. Only all the gifts God meant to have before original sin came into the world, with its sad consequence of death. On that day, Vinny's victory will be complete, and he will share the glory of Christ in his new creation, body and soul, to live in absolute perfection for all eternity. And so let that comfort us today, that we realize our tears are for ourselves because we will miss Vinny. But our tears are not for him, as we even heard in our second reading, that we would not give in to grief like those who have no hope, because we realize Vinny is at peace now. There's no more pain, no more of the sufferings. Now he knows a glory that we hope one day to share. And so this morning as we come here, we can thank God for the gift of Vinny, these 54 years in our lives, and they may not have been all that we wanted, but what time we had with him, we can very much appreciate. And we can thank him for the happy memories we hold, memories which no one can take away from us. We thank him for the gift of Vinny as a son, as a brother, an uncle and friend, as a good member and an integral part of our San Silverio Society, and indeed of our lives. And we thank the Lord for the gift of Vinny, and now we can graciously return him to the Lord, knowing that one day we will meet him again. And Dora, if I may say a word especially to you, I don't think there could be a more painful thing in the world than for a parent to bury a child. Only those here who may have gone through that know the pain that you are suffering. We can understand that it's painful, but we can't really appreciate it. And so I ask you to place yourself in the arms of somebody who does know what it's like to lose her only son. Put yourself in the arms of our Blessed Mother. She watched her son suffer and die, and she saw the terrible pain that he went through. But remember, she also saw him risen from the dead. And one day, like the Blessed Mother, you will have your son back. Let her comfort you through the dark days, to know that she understands your tears. She was there herself. And she can strengthen you to say, have faith in my son, because just as my son was risen, so one day your son will be risen. And know that we are all here to pray with you and to help the Lord help us all know that indeed he was with Vinny every day through his trials, and he is with us forevermore. And Vinny will always be able to see all the beautiful things that happen in our lives in the future, that we have not lost him. He's only gone for a little while, and that the next time we see him, we will have him back for all eternity. Sia laudato Jesu Christo. And today, if you happen to know the prayer of San Silverio, we're going to pray it as an intercession as well for Vinny. O glorious Saint Silverio, pastor of the universal church and hero of the faith, you were blessed with the courage to die and witness to Christ and the gospel. Through your example, may we be filled with the courage to profess our faith in Jesus Christ and to serve him with generosity in our neighbor. Amen.